Hi guys, I'm Courtney,
And I'm Lisa.
and welcome to the next chapter in the Book of the Dead. Hi guys, welcome back to part 2 of the spree killer Andrew Cunanan. So, we're just going to jump right in. We left off last week with Andrew flying to Minnesota. Now, he had bought a one-way ticket, allegedly after begging his credit card company to extend his limit, according to History.com. Now, Andrew arrives in Minnesota, and David Madsen, his ex-boyfriend, picks him up from the airport. According to a 1997 article for the New York Times, they went out to dinner at Nye's restaurant, and then they went to get drinks at a popular gay nightclub called the Gay 90s. Now, according to Harper's Bazaar, they had dinner with some of David's friends, and they reported that David was visibly uncomfortable around Andrew. According to a former boyfriend of David, Cedric Rucker, David, quote, held suspicions that Andrew was involved in the international drug trade, bringing drugs into the country from across the Mexican border. He probably had ties to organized crime. I said, why would you want to be affiliated with this? He said, because he's trying to make a change in his life. Andrew just needs help. I mean, we talked about David last week. I gave you guys some information about him, and it just seemed like this was generally the kind of person that he was. So I'm not surprised that he, in some way, kind of felt bad for Andrew and just wanted to help him. Maybe he struggled with, like, cutting him off completely.
I can understand that. It's not easy. It's just not an easy task to, avoid someone that you cared about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were together for about a year, and I mean, even Jeff had a hard time completely cutting Andrew out. Now, at the dinner, Andrew was doing what he did best, telling insane stories about his life. Because as we talked about last week, Andrew really liked to embellish his life and his parents and the way he grew up. Now, the details of what happened after this dinner and during this weekend that he was in Minneapolis is a little fuzzy, but it seems that the day after he arrived, Andrew went to Jeff's apartment. Now, Jeff had apparently left a key for Andrew to stay the night, which is according to that New York Times article. Now, Jeff was away with his new boyfriend, John Hackett, for the night, so no one was there, but David slept there anyway, which, I don't know, I'd feel a little weird about my friend that I don't particularly like that much staying in my house while I'm not there.
Well, yes, but again, because there was a relationship, at one point in time, he may have felt comfortable enough to do that because it's like, hey, I'm not going to be there. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to have, a heated argument or anything like that. So it's okay. By the time I get, maybe he figured that he would be gone.
Yeah, that's true. Now, according to Vanity Fair, Jeff had actually told Andrew that he wouldn't be around much while Andrew was in town. It was his boyfriend John's birthday weekend. Like, he had a lot of plans with him. So he did tell Andrew, like, look, I'll see you when I can, but I'm not, like, I have plans with my boyfriend. Like, that's it. And Jeff had also allegedly been talking to David. They had gotten to know each other when Jeff moved to Minneapolis, and he warned David about how much of a liar Andrew was. So Jeff was making it very clear to David, like, hey, I know you guys, like, aren't dating anymore, but he's coming into town. I'm just letting you know. You guys had a long-distance relationship. You don't know him as well as I do. The guy has a real problem with lying. Which, I mean, good for Jeff. I mean, you're looking out.
Absolutely.
Now, the following day, April 27th, 1997, according to Oxygen.com, Andrew went back to David's home and he gets in contact with Jeff. Andrew asks if Jeff would stop by David's home, and Jeff agrees. Now, Jeff tells his boyfriend that he needs to talk to Andrew about something pretty important, but he allegedly wanted to just blow Andrew off and take John out because that day was his birthday. But John tells Jeff he really wants to go dancing. So Jeff says, like, okay, fine, I'm going to go to David's and I'll meet up with you at the Gay 90s between 10 and 10:30. Sometime around 9 to 9:15, Jeff leaves to go to David's, and at around 9:45 p.m. on April 27, 1997, David's neighbor heard someone yell, quote, "Get the fuck out," a bang as if something hit the wall and then water running. And that was it.
Okay, so what was that?
Well, the next day was a Monday, and David didn't show up to work. But according to the New York Times, neighbors saw David and Andrew walking Prince, David's Dalmatian, around the neighborhood. Now, Jeff didn't show up for work either, and his boyfriend was very concerned, according to Oxygen.com. So he called the police, but apparently they just dismissed the concerns. They weren't going to look into anything. In fact, John said that the police told him that Jeff was a big boy, and unless his parents reported him missing, they wouldn't do anything for 72 hours.
How about a wellness check?
Well, they weren't doing that, apparently. Now, John didn't call Jeff's parents and inform them of what was going on, and I kind of get that because they didn't know that Jeff was gay. And I understand John not wanting to out Jeff to his parents, because what if this was nothing?
No, I get it, but you know, hey, I'm a friend of his. Haven't heard from, we were supposed to go out, and, he doesn't do this. If he says he's going to be someplace, he's always there. Could you ask the police to just do a wellness check? Maybe something along that vein. It wasn't saying anything that, you have to worry about. It's all the truth. But could you just do, a wellness check, because he was supposed to meet me and I can't get him on the phone, and I just want to make sure that he's okay.
Yeah, I get that. Well, according to Vanity Fair, when Jeff never came back to their apartment, he, quote, immediately started calling hospitals and the jail. Like, he was looking everywhere. However, on Tuesday, there was still no sign of Jeff, and David once again failed to show up to work. And that was definitely not like David. Everyone said at his job, at the firm where he worked, he was super reliable. He was like a rising star at this company, so he wouldn't just flake. No call, no show 2 days in a row. That was not David. So his coworkers went to his apartment to look for him. Now, actually, in fact, the last time anyone heard from David was Saturday the 24th, so 5 days earlier. David's best friend, Monique Salvetti, had talked to him on the phone and made plans to meet later that day, but she never heard back from him. Now, when these coworkers go back to knock on the door, they hear what they believe to be whispering. So they knock on the door and no one answers. They call the police. According to Harper's Bazaar, the police told the coworkers that if they came down there, they would have to break down the door, and if Prince was aggressive towards them, they would shoot the dog. Which, obviously, if you break down the door, the dog might be a little aggressive.
I would think so.
But
hey, what do I...
So the coworkers say, you know what? Never mind. We'll figure it out. Don't worry. So they called the building superintendent to open the door, which she did. Now, when she opens the door, no one was home, but she makes a terrible discovery. On the floor of the apartment was a rolled up carpet, and inside that carpet was the body of a man.
Okay, we really don't need to go any further than that, thank you. I was good wondering where he was. I don't need any visuals.
Well, this whole part is about the murders.
Oh, jeez, Christmas.
Now, this man had been bludgeoned with a hammer that had been found at the scene, left on a table by the door, and there were 2 sets of bloody footprints on the floor. Now, police also found a gym bag that contained drugs, bullets, and pornography, but according to that same article, police apparently couldn't figure out if it belonged to David or Andrew, even though Andrew's name was, in fact, written on this duffel bag. And in fact, Monique Salvetti was the one to point out, hey, there's a name written on the duffel bag. It's not David Madsen's name.
Okay, well, yeah. What can I say?
We're not surprised that the police aren't doing a great job, but whatever.
Well, you could argue that there is no proof that it's his. It could be somebody else's. Hey, the bag's just sitting there. My friend's coming over. I don't want them to see it. to see this, so let me throw it, in there and I'll get it later.
Well, it had Andrew's name on it.
It doesn't matter. Like, if your purse is sitting out and I have, I don't know, jewelry I just bought and I don't want my husband to see it, and my purse is in the other room and he's walking in the door, I may shove it in there just...
No, but my point is they didn't know who the duffel bag belonged to at all. And she said, well, the duffel bag belongs to someone named Andrew Cunanan.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the contents of said duffel bag.
I mean the bag in general.
Well, yeah, then, See, I tried playing devil's advocate there.
It didn't work out very well.
And it did not work out very well because, for obvious reasons, they didn't read it.
Yeah. Now, according to Vanity Fair, there was blood all over the back of the door, and David's wallet was left behind. Police also find a bloody Banana Republic t-shirt.
Great. I wonder what happened there.
Yeah. Now, the following day, the man was positively identified as Jeff Trail based on the tattoo on his leg, which was of Marvin the Martian, just in case anyone was curious. And it was determined that he had been hit a total of 27 times in the head, chest, and face. So this wasn't... This was...
That's rage.
Exactly. This was a murder that happened out of sheer rage. Like, this was overkill.
I don't know why people can just... Don't be a maggot. Like, come on now. Don't be a maggot.
According to police, Jeff's watch had stopped at 9:55 p.m., so they believed that was the time of death. So that means that about 10 minutes after that neighbor heard those noises, Jeff was dead. Police actually suspected David as the killer, since he, as well as his red Jeep Cherokee, was missing. So police actually initially thought that David was the murderer. Which, I mean, I get, because it was his house, as I said, and, they can't find him either, and they don't know where his car is, so I get why they initially suspected him. Now, Minneapolis Police Sergeant Robert Tickich told Vanity Fair, quote, "My first thought, it's Madsen. It's his apartment. There's a body in there. There's no way to pin it on Cunanan as opposed to Madsen." So they were staking out David's parents' home in the event that he went there, but he never showed up. The Thursday or Friday after Jeff's body was identified, David's Jeep was seen moving erratically on Interstate 35. It reportedly kept speeding up and slowing down, but they don't know what happened to the Jeep or the passengers after that, because no one was able to see who was driving the car. In fact, police had nothing. Well, okay, in reality, they had a decent amount of evidence just sitting at David's apartment that they missed, but we'll get to that.
You're always getting to that.
I always get there in the end.
You just don't get there fast enough.
For you.
I'm sure there's at least one other person that thinks you don't get there fast enough.
Okay, well, I get that, but we have to go in chronological order.
Fine.
Now, Officer Todd Rivard of the Chisago County Sheriff's Department said, quote, "From Tuesday early a.m. till Saturday, it's a big gray area. We got no reports, not even verbal. We heard nothing." That is until May 3rd, this Saturday after Jeff's murder. On Minnesota's Lake Rush were two fishermen. They were doing their thing early that Saturday, fishing, when they spot something in the grass on the bank of the water. That something was the body of David Madsen, who had been shot 3 times, once through the eye, in the head, and in the back. Next to him in the grass were the keys to his car, but the Jeep was nowhere to be found. It was determined that he had been shot with .40 caliber Golden Saber bullets, and he had defensive wounds on his hands. It's as if he had raised his hands up to try and shield himself from the bullets. Now, the time of his death was estimated to be sometime on Friday, May 2nd. Police obviously were questioning why David stuck around with Andrew after Jeff's murder, because obviously they were together, because, as I said, there were eyewitnesses. According to Vanity Fair, Chisago Police Captain Tom Cronin, who was also a graduate of the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit, said, quote, "It's not surprising that David stayed with him and he sat with the body for 2 days. Not at all. It makes perfect sense to David. This guy's got power over me. I can't leave." The killing itself shows how powerful he is. Which, I mean, if you can beat someone with a hammer 27 times, there's a lot of power behind that.
A lot of rage.
Yeah. Now, we're going to get to exactly how police found David's Jeep because it has to do with the next murder. But police find the Jeep in Chicago, and inside is a parking ticket showing that the Jeep had been parked in a parking garage in Chicago on the 2nd around 6 a.m. So, David was killed on the 2nd, and at some point, at 6 a.m., the Jeep was in Chicago. So the timeline just seems weird to me.
Well, it seems weird to me, but I'm waiting for the rest of the story, because you always come up with things like, I'll ask the question and then you tell me the answer, a half hour from now.
Thanks. I'm sorry that I do too much research for you. On Sunday, May 4th, so 2 days after David's death, another body is found.
Do I dare ask who this one was? I mean, like...
You could guess and you would probably be wrong.
I'm sure I would be. That's why I'm not going to guess.
So Lee Miglin, according to the Washington Post, was a 72-year-old real estate mogul. An architect who had worked with Lee in the past, Stanley Tigerman, said, quote, "He was not the typical real estate developer. He was a terrific, gentle, sweet guy. He was very self-effacing. He was never the type to blow his own horn." And a work colleague, Mark Jurassic, said, quote, "He was a gentleman in the truest sense of the word." Lee was married to successful businesswoman and former model Marilyn Miglin. She had a cosmetics and perfume company that she sold on HSN, which is the home shopping network. And she was so successful, she was nicknamed the Queen of Makeovers. Lee, for his part, was not shy about how proud he was of Marilyn. Stanley Tigerman said, quote, "He was very proud of her and very much in love with her. He always talked about her." They were both very involved in social events and charities and raised a considerable amount of money for the University of Chicago hospitals and the Museum of Science and Industry, among other charities. And according to that same article in the Post, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley described Lee as, quote, "a tireless contributor to Chicago's charitable and cultural communities." So he's clearly a genuinely good human being. Him and his wife both, right?
Yes, so why would anybody want to hurt him?
Well, on May 4th, 1997, Marilyn comes home from a business trip. She had gone to Toronto, Canada. And she's pretty much concerned from the moment she left the airport. Now, she had called Lee earlier that day and left him a message saying that she would be flying back to Chicago early that morning, and Lee, I'm sure, usually met her at the airport to pick her up. However, he didn't pick her up that day. According to CBS News, when she arrived at their home, her husband was not in the house, and there was a replica handgun in the bathroom.
Why would anybody want to hurt this man?
Well,
obviously you're going to get to the...
I'm going to get to it, but I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have, an exact answer for you.
Why not?
Because certain person didn't leave or didn't give specific answers.
Because that certain person is a maggot.
Yes. Now, in addition to Lee being missing, the garage door was open and the couple's 1994 green Lexus was missing as well. Now, I just want you to remember that it's a green Lexus. That's a pretty abnormal color. You don't see a lot of green cars even now. You know what I mean?
No, I see an awful lot of different cars on the road because of work and, where I travel, but...
Well, a green Lexus specifically... you know what I mean? I don't see a lot of green Lexus.
Okay. I'll go with that one. Go ahead.
Whatever the plural of Lexus is. Now, Marilyn immediately called the police. When police arrived, it didn't take them long to find Lee. In the garage behind their home was his body, his feet bound with masking tape. His throat had been cut from ear to ear, like he had been almost decapitated. When the Cook County Medical Examiner arrived, he determined that while Lee's clothes were completely saturated in blood, the floor around him was not, so it was likely he had not been killed in the garage, but moved there after the attack. It was also determined, according to ABC, that all of Lee's ribs had been broken.
Why do you need to be that vicious with a 72-year-old man?
Exactly. He was 72. This was not a 20-something-year-old in prime physical condition that could...
I mean, I'm not saying that a 72-year-old man cannot be in prime physical condition.
No, absolutely not. But against, someone much younger than them, you're obviously going to be at a disadvantage. If one rib was broken, two, all right, I'd say that, that probably happened during some sort of struggle. But every rib,
again, it's this whole vicious attack. Like, why? Like, why is there so much rage?
Now, according to that same CBS article, the time of death was determined to be around 2 and 5 p.m. on May 3rd, the day before. The last time he had been seen was earlier that day on the 3rd at the hairdresser's, and the owner, Dolores Kimmel, said, quote, "He was in a very good mood. We were discussing Marilyn's fundraising at the Drake, which was very successful, and that they were planning to go to Israel and name a wing in her honor, and he was looking forward to that." Now, the original theory detectives came up with was that Lee had parked his Lexus in the garage. It was like a detached garage behind the home, and there was an alley. So they determined or theorized that Lee, after parking the car, was in the alley behind the home opening the back gate when someone came up behind him and lured him into the second garage. Apparently, they had two garages. They lived in a mansion. I call it a home. They lived in a mansion. Likely using the replica gun to threaten Lee into compliance where he was killed. Now, the murder weapon was determined to be 5-foot-long pruning shears, which police discovered in the garage as well. The medical examiner had reported no defensive wounds and also said Lee was likely tortured in some way, as a bag had been found taped around his head with holes cut into it so he could breathe. Police also noted that the killer or killers had made themselves at home in the house long enough that they had eaten the ham that was in the refrigerator and left a half-eaten apple in the kitchen, as well as used the shower and had shaved in the bathroom. So, whoever this killer was clearly had time to kill.
And obviously no remorse for said killing, if you can then sit down and eat and...
Yeah, exactly. They had time to eat, they had time to take a shower, clean themselves up a bit. Like, there was no sense of urgency going on in this killer's mind. I will say, according to that Vanity Fair article, and I know I keep going back to it, it's just the most comprehensive article that I found on this case. Like, it's really, really detailed. It's an entire expose. The family dog named Honey was completely unharmed and calm when police arrived, so she wasn't harmed at all. And it does seem that the killer did rob the home as well. Between $8,000 and $10,000 was missing, as well as several of Lee's suits were missing. And they were, I'm sure, quite expensive. Like, I'm sure they were hand-tailored to him and things like that. I'm sure they were designer. That article I mentioned earlier by ABC mentioned that Lee's prized coin collection was missing as well. A close friend of Marilyn's, a socialite named Sugar Routeboard, who had come immediately to the home when Marilyn told her what was happening, said, quote, "There was a horrible feeling in the house. Everywhere you turned, there was evidence. We couldn't touch anything." Meanwhile, according to a different article for CBS, police had determined that David and Jeff had something in common, and that was Andrew Cunanan. So they did go around to the local gay bars in the area asking about him, but according to CBS, investigators never went to that nightclub, the Gay 90s, and asked questions. And apparently witnesses would later say that they had seen Andrew talking to the owner there, Mike Bloom, and in fact, Mike Bloom allegedly said he was, quote, convinced he had talked to Cunanan, who was having coffee in the bar in the early morning after the murder of Jeff. Mike said, quote, "It was about 8:45 in the morning and we weren't that busy at the time and he was sitting like in a back booth. So we went to start talking to him, me and the bartender. It's weird that I can picture who he was then. He said, I've got some stuff to do, down in the loft," which is what Andrew told Mike. Mike also said, quote, "I talked to him for about 15 minutes. He was a very nice guy." And I'm sure that Mike did think he was a nice guy. I'm sure Andrew was really nice to him. Because, as I said earlier in last week's chapter, Andrew was ridiculously charismatic. So I'm sure that Mike thought he was a nice guy. Because I'm sure Andrew was very charming. And besides the fact that Mike had no reason to think that Andrew wasn't a nice guy.
Right.
Now, we're going to talk in a few moments, as I said, about the evidence that police neglected to find at David Manson's home the first time that they were there. And it definitely could have helped them in their investigation to find him and identify him as the killer. as well as possibly preventing future murders. Part of the issue with Lee's murder is they didn't know who would kill him. He was such a nice guy. He had 0 enemies. Everyone loved him. Who would kill him? According to Harper's Bazaar, there was rumors after the fact that Andrew had killed, after it was determined that Andrew had killed Lee, that Andrew either knew Lee personally or his 25-year-old son, Duke, who was like a rising actor in the industry, and allegedly Andrew had name-dropped him a few times to his friends. But Lee's family insists that that never happens. They never met. They didn't know each other at all. But police weren't sure. At least, they're not convinced because there was no signs of forced entry at the home. So police were really convinced that Lee knew the person that killed him. Obviously, before Andrew was identified as the killer.
Right, but there wouldn't have been forced entry if he attacked him or
held him at gunpoint.
From outside.
Exactly. So I don't know why, like, they kind of flip-flopped. Like, at first they were like, they theorized, like, yeah, he was probably, you know, grabbed from behind and held at gunpoint, and that's how he got access. And then it was, well, there was no forced entry, so he probably knew his killer. Like, those, you can't say that theory and then go, but there was no forced entry. Even though you acknowledge that there could be no forced entry because he was held at gunpoint.
Right, and he was gotten from outside the home, not inside the home where he, you know, broke in and found him there, and it was, you know, from that alleyway.
Exactly. So I don't get what the police are trying to say.
It doesn't make sense to me either, but hey, I am not a police investigator, so I don't know.
Well, around 2.5 days later, at about midnight on May 6th, police in Chicago find a red Jeep Cherokee nearby Lee's home. They said it was like 85 paces from the front door. So probably what? Maybe a couple blocks? Maybe less?
I would think it would be less, but, you know, it depends on who's making those paces.
Exactly. So it could be a block away. It could be 2 blocks away. But
I mean,
it was...
well, if it's 80, you know, is it a foot?
I don't know, it just said 85 paces, so I don't know.
If it's measured in feet, that would be 85 feet. So it would be basically the first house on the block.
Yeah.
And then 2 houses down could be 85 feet. Because I know you're supposed to park, and I know that this sounds weird, but you're supposed to park 50 feet from a fire hydrant. So if we're, you know, where they have like
50 feet isn't far.
No, but now you're adding just another 35 feet to that. So it's not...
It's a couple of driveways.
Yeah, it's not that far away.
Yeah, so they find this Jeep. I don't know why it took them 2 days to find this Jeep if it was right there. Because it had Minnesota license plates. So obviously it didn't belong in Illinois. You know what I mean?
Well, you know...
Either way, they find this Jeep.
I cannot guess as to how this investigation was conducted. How's that?
Not very well, clearly.
Hey, look, I'm trying to be, you know, not jumping to conclusions here.
So, obviously, they, you know, as I said, they find this red Jeep Cherokee, and it's got a bunch of parking tickets on it. So, they run the plates and learn that this Jeep belonged to Minneapolis resident David Madsen. And again, as I said earlier, they find inside that parking thing that showed he was parked in a parking garage in Chicago at some point. Now, when they get in contact with the Minneapolis police, they learn about the murders that occurred in Minnesota, and they learn that the culprit, or the man that police at least believe is the culprit, is Andrew Cunanan. So now they know, okay, this person most likely killed 2 people in Minneapolis. One of the victims' cars is now in Illinois, basically right next door to the home where another victim is found. So clearly they're all connected.
Well, I would think so, unless the car is able to drive itself.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
well,
I would say develop legs and walk, but yeah. So maybe it's one of those self-driving vehicles.
I don't think those were around yet.
Yeah, well,
our great overlord Elon Musk haven't gotten into Tesla yet, I don't think.
They're not putting their thinking caps on for this one.
Not at all. Well, the FBI gets brought in, and they launch a nationwide manhunt for Andrew. At this point, police in Chicago were also tracking the Lexus. Now, this Lexus had a car phone, and Andrew was using the car phone because, you know, this is the man with the 147 IQ, but not smart enough to realize, like, maybe I shouldn't use the car that they could definitely track. The car phone that they could definitely track.
Well, no, because this is, hey, I have, like, a new toy to play with.
Yeah, I mean, he was incredibly materialistic, as we talked about, so I'm sure he did think, like, woohoo, nice car, has a phone in it.
Right. So it's a new toy to play with.
Yeah.
Just to further my own, I don't know, stroke my own ego, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, again, when you're, I don't know how a maggot thinks.
Well,
yeah.
He was very, I mean, as we talked about last week, Andrew was very much into himself.
Well, yeah, it was the I Love Me by Andrew hour constantly.
Exactly.
It never ended.
I'm sure this was just, while obviously the Lexus was a means of kind of losing the police in Chicago, or in Minneapolis, because he had switched cars, it was also a brand spanking new car. A brand new Lexus.
Right, so it's a new toy for someone that,
does not have the money to afford the things that he wished he could afford.
Well, it's nice to want. I would like, there's a lot of things that I would like to have. And, the attitude is, well, it's nice to wish, it's nice to dream, it's nice to, hope for, but this individual just seems to feel like they can take whatever they want, whenever, wherever, however, and if they have to do some horrific thing to get what they want, well, then I guess the attitude is so be it. I don't know. I have no idea. It's a foreign concept for me.
As I said, he's using this phone. And the police and the FBI can, in fact, track and triangulate this phone. So they manage to track his movements as far as Pennsylvania before the media announces that the police are tracking him, and the trail goes cold.
Well, yeah, because he heard it and went, oops, I shouldn't be using this phone, so I'm not going to anymore.
Exactly. So
I don't know why they give information out to, I
don't know if this was, I will say I doubt that the police gave this information willingly to the media. I'm sure there might have been a leak. And the media went, well, look what we've got, let's publish it. I mean, there's obviously that's the media's job to publish stories, but I feel like in certain regards, like, the media needs to think a little bit. Like, maybe don't announce that the FBI and the police are tracking this person via a phone in the car that they stole.
Well, considering that this person is on the loose, has the potential to do horrific
exactly.
things.
Like, clearly very, very dangerous. This is not someone who just stole the car. Like, broke into the garage and stole the car a joyride.
If you want to say, be on the lookout for, this person that, whatever, give a little bit of a description, and, we think he was headed in this direction.
Exactly. Like, at least be a little vague about it. Like, come on. Like, I mean, for this instance right now, the media screwed up the investigation because Andrew, at some point, most likely either saw this on the news somewhere or in the papers, heard it on the radio, and he ripped the phone out of the car, according to crimeandinvestigation.co.uk. Now, at this point, Andrew still has a problem, though. He may have gotten rid of the phone, but he's still driving around in a very conspicuous car with Illinois plates on it. So, obviously, he needs to get rid of it. And that is where 45-year-old J. William Reese comes in. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. According to the Washington Post, Bill, as he liked to be called, grew up in Vineland, New Jersey, and lived most of his adult life in Bridgeton, which is, like, I think the next town over in South Jersey, with his wife Rebecca and their son Troy. Now, he was a former electrician, and he grew tired of driving from job site to job site, so he came upon an open position at Finns Point National Cemetery in Pennsville, New Jersey, as a caretaker, which, according to CEM.va.gov, is, quote, open to all members of the armed forces who have met a minimum active duty service requirement and were discharged under conditions other than dishonorable. So it's a historic site.
And a military
cemetery, exactly. And it's used primarily for the burial of soldiers that fought in the Civil War. That is pretty much only what it's used for, but you can be buried there now.
So it's a definite historical
yes
burial ground, sacred ground.
Yes, exactly. Now, Bill worked there for 20 years, not only keeping the grounds in order as well as the lodge on the property, but he took his job very seriously, especially when loved ones came with remains for burial, for which he carefully dug the grave. He also lovingly showed all family members where their loved one's resting place was when necessary, like descendants as well. Bill's friend of more than 30 years, Bob Shaw, told the Post, quote, that place fit him like a dress glove. He was a common guy and a humble guy. Even on his days off, he would drive down in his old red Chevy pickup truck and raise the flag in the mornings, and at night he would go back to lower it back down.
So he took his caretaking duties very seriously and affording the ones that are buried there the honor and the respect that they so richly deserve.
Exactly. Alicia Bjornson, the historic preservation specialist at Fort Mott State Park, which is, I think, just across like the highway from the cemetery, said, quote, I think his incredible respect for life as well as what had passed showed just how he cared for the cemetery. Everything just basically sparkled. So, I mean, the cemetery was pristine. I'm sure none of those headstones were obviously they were very old, but I'm sure he made sure that they were in the best condition that they could be.
Very straight.
Exactly.
Just affording those servicemen, because if it's Civil War, it's usually men.
Yeah.
Yes, women did help out more, like with the hospital and things like that. So I'm thinking it's probably mostly men.
Yeah,
maybe a few females that like were nurses or something.
Exactly, and I know that it was mostly it was from the Civil War soldiers from both sides, Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers. So even the Confederate soldiers that died in the North, they were still honored by being buried in that cemetery.
Well, right, because they were fighting for a cause that they truly believed in. I'm not saying it was right in any way, shape, or form. Do not misunderstand.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Like they were putting their life on the line for what was essentially, quote, their country, because at that point they wanted to kind of split up.
Right.
So that's what, at the end of the day, that's what they were fighting for. They were fighting for their country, whether or not they believed it was, one whole country as America, or if they believed, that the Confederacy should be separate.
Right, but no, what I'm trying to say is, one, because of, think about a soldier that is in any armed forces now, if they are killed on a battlefield, they are usually brought home to be buried. Mm-hmm. Okay? I know that that's like the mantra of the United States, where no one left behind.
Yeah.
No soldier left behind. So if they can, they are brought home for burial.
Yeah.
During the Civil War, that was
a lot
kind of impossible for this simple reason that usually if they fell on a battlefield, once the battle was over, those soldiers were they were buried
where they fell.
Kind of. Yeah, they weren't transported for, I want to say, sanitary reasons, and the wrong
I know, I
word
understand
to
what
use.
you're saying, especially, like, I get what you're saying, because in a time where they didn't have proper procedures in hygiene, obviously this was the Civil War, they weren't bathing properly, they weren't taking care of themselves properly, it was a biohazard. And they understood that to an extent, that it was very dangerous for those living with, suffering from wounds, or, if they were missing limbs from the war, just exposing them to more unsanitary conditions than necessary would, is definitely hurting more than helping the situation. So I understand that.
You figure how many men and women died, during that time with the battles and whatnot. They were buried.
But they were, afforded that, they were buried at
in hallowed ground.
Exactly. And they were buried in the cemetery, and, at the end of the day, Bill took it upon himself to make sure that each and every one of them, regardless of whether they were a Confederate or a Union soldier, they all had the same respect. He took care of each and every one of their graves.
Okay, when Jerry and I go on, go different places for a vacation or whatever, we happened to be down in Philadelphia, and there was a cemetery. And I feel like, yes, you could go into the cemetery, but I feel like I don't want to disturb their rest. The one, and you can go see, I think it was Benjamin Franklin was buried there. And I kind of feel like, yes, it's very interesting to go, but I'm not... I don't want to. I want to respect.
Exactly. No, I get what you're saying. When
their peace.
When my husband and I were in Savannah, it's known for being like one of the most haunted places in the United States. The entire town was built on a giant burial ground during, actually, I believe, the Civil War. It was at one point, I think something like, I forgot who I was talking to down there, but they said something like 10,000 soldiers or however many there were told to basically lay down their arms, and, they could walk, and they wouldn't do it, and they were killed where they stood and literally buried right where they died, and the town of Savannah was built right on top. So, but there is a big cemetery there, very famous cemetery. It is, I believe, a historic cemetery, and you could go in there. Obviously, it's very popular for tours. It's like the graveyard tours. And, I could not, I like doing stuff like that, but I could not go into a cemetery and, kind of ogle at these graves. And so it just seemed very disrespectful to me. And it also left a bad taste in my mouth. Netflix was filming a movie while we were down there, and they were filming in the cemetery and just kind of traipsing through the graves, because my husband and I had passed it at night while they were filming. And it rubbed me the wrong way, because it just seems disrespectful. I get it, you're filming, but, you're telling me you can't just build a set with a cemetery, a fake cemetery, you have to just walk on these people's graves. It's different if, a couple of people are going through and, looking at the graves, but, a whole movie crew just kind of traipsing through it.
I understand your thought process. Again, when Jerry and I were in Williamsburg, and we were at... it was a historical place, and I can't remember what it was. We were at this church, and there was a graveyard, and you think about, basically it's like the Pilgrims.
Yeah.
And I was very careful to, not walk.
Yeah, no, even
very carefully just make my way around, because that was the way you had to go out. It was basically around this. Through. And it was, I wasn't walking next to the headstones. I made sure that I was back, and it was just my way of honoring.
No, yeah, I get what you're saying, because even the last time I was in a cemetery, for my husband had a loss in his family, so we went to this funeral, and another family is buried in that cemetery, and he wanted to show me this grave. As we were walking towards this other gravesite, literally because the part of the cemetery that we were in was a lot older, and the gravestones were the ones that are flat on the ground, not the headstones that stand up. And I'm literally staring at the ground, making sure that I am not walking on any place where I even thought I saw a grave. They were very old and very damaged. And I remember saying something to my mother-in-law. I was very upset that they were in bad condition. And she promised me that she would call and say, look, you need to go over and look at like XYZ grave.
And fix it.
Because I was very upset. Because it's disrespectful. And like, I get it. They're not there anymore. And you could tell like their families don't visit anymore and things like that. And that's fine. That's a family's personal decision. But I think if you're going to take care of the grounds and the graves in a cemetery like Bill was doing, you should respect all of the graves and make sure they're okay. And that's clearly what Bill was doing.
Absolutely. And that's why, yes, we've gone off, but for me, it's honoring, whether I know the person or not, it is honoring their life and that they meant something to somebody.
Exactly. Like they were here, like they walked on this earth at some point. And that's very valid. But we've digressed enough. That's our stance on cemeteries, in case you guys were curious. But Bill, to get back to Bill, he was a lover of history with a special interest in the Civil War. Actually, one of his ancestors fought and died in the Civil War. And they were also buried at Finn's Point. He was one of the founders of the 14th Brooklyn Society, which was a Civil War reenactment group, and he was active in reenactments for a long time, and he and Rebecca would go regularly. They also would participate in craft fairs together, where he would build various things and she would paint them, which is like, that's just like really cute that they did craft fairs together. He was also very active at his Methodist church. He was a very religious man. Although recently that year he had slowed down, he was not as steady on his feet. And he confided in Alicia Bjornson that he had been diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. So, he didn't know how long he would be able to be the caretaker for, because obviously that's a job where it's a lot of labor, it's a lot of
physical work.
You're taking care of the land. I don't know how big Finn's Point is, but it's big enough that there are a decent amount of graves there, I'm sure. It's a lot of, grass that he has to maintain. Plus, the lodge, and I'm sure there's some sort of like visitor center because it's a historic site. I'm sure there was a lot of work. So he wasn't going to be able to do it for much longer. But while he was there, he was taking, a lot of pride in his work. On May 9th, when Bill did not come home for dinner, Rebecca drove to the cemetery looking for her husband. Now, when she got there, she noticed that his truck was not in its usual spot, but instead there was a green Lexus with Illinois plates.
So the maggot strikes again.
According to an article for the New York Daily News, Rebecca noticed his office door was open, but when she looked inside, he wasn't there, nor was he on the grounds, so she called the police. When police got there, they discovered Bill's body very quickly in the basement of the lodge with a single 40-millimeter gunshot wound to his head.
Why? The man was not well. He was at work, minding his own business, doing his job, honoring the memories of the people that are buried there. He could have just said, hey, look, hand me the keys, I have a gun. And I'm sure that he would have said, here, take the truck, leave me alone. Mm-hmm. And he could have.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that Bill was found next to an open Bible, so he had most likely been reading his Bible when Andrew came knocking, which just somehow makes it even worse.
Well,
the man was sitting there reading his Bible, probably taking a break, from work. He was taking that time with, with his beliefs and his spirituality, and Andrew had to come by and kill him.
For no reason. None. Zero.
I know. Bob Shaw, his Bill's friend, told the Washington Post, quote, "Bill was a man of his word. He was a humble guy, too. He would take people on face value, and I think that was probably his downfall. Who looks for a crazy man to show up at a place like that?" And it was theorized after the fact that Andrew had come looking for a different car, and that's why he killed.
Again, no reason, just said, "Hey, I have a gun." He didn't even need to have a gun. He could have just put his hand in his pocket and said, "Hey, I have a gun. Give me your keys." And this man probably would have said, "Here, take the keys. I don't want any trouble. Take the keys and go." Did not have to do that, but once a maggot, always a maggot.
2 days after the discovery of Bill's body, a man in South Carolina, Scott Watts, according to the LA Times, reported his license plates stolen. So it was likely that Andrew stole the plates off of this man's car and put them on Bill's truck.
to further disguise it.
Now, after this murder, things were quiet in terms of there weren't any murders for the remainder of May and June and into July of 1997. That's not to say that the police and the FBI weren't looking for him. His place was plastered on the media, and America's Most Wanted featured him 3 times. And sometime after Bill's murder, Andrew was the 449th person put on the FBI's Most Wanted list. Police also, sometime in late June, went back to David's apartment and did a more thorough search, which they should have done the first time, but, okay. Now, the police, as I said, they go back and they find more evidence. They recovered Andrew's toiletry bag and a pair of blood-soaked jeans in size 36. Now, David was confirmed to be a size 32, so they definitely weren't his. They were obviously most likely Andrew's. Now, all of this evidence was important because while they had fingerprints at every crime scene, they had nothing to match them to because Andrew had never been arrested for a crime before this. The only thing they had on file was his thumbprint from when he had gotten his license. Because I guess at the time when you got your license, in some places they took your thumbprint. On June 12th, Andrew becomes, as I said, the 449th person added to the 10 most wanted list. And from what I can gather, where exactly Andrew was for the period of time where police and the FBI couldn't find him is a little bit murky. For instance, at least 3 people swore they saw him and interacted with him in mid-June in Boston, and another man said that Cunanan told him exactly who he was and said he needed cash to get to Canada. However, it was later confirmed that he had checked into the Normandy Plaza Hotel in Miami Beach sometime in mid-May, which was a pretty cheap motel. Even though it sounds very fancy, the Normandy Plaza, but it's a pretty cheap motel in Miami. According to the LA Times, according to housekeepers there, he seemed to be a bit of a neat freak, but his bed was always a mess. He never left his belongings around except for loose change that he kept in a cup on the table, and I'm curious as to whether that loose change was really loose change or the coins from Lee's coin collection. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He always wore sunglasses, even at night, and he always carried a backpack. Now, at some point, he was recognized after pawning one of Lee's coins for $190, but by the time police got there, he was gone. Although he had kindly signed the pawn slip with his real name and gave his thumbprint, which is required by law, if I remember correctly. In order to pawn something, you have to give a thumbprint. That assumes that in the event the item was actually stolen goods, it could be tracked back to whoever pawned it initially. So police at this point knew he was definitely in or had recently been in Miami Beach. Now, on July 14th, Andrew shows up at Cazzoli's Pizza for his usual order of 2 slices of pizza and a soda, where he allegedly asked the man making the pizzas for $1 because he's short on money. He also was allegedly noted to have cut his hair. Now we come to July 15th. In Miami, 50-year-old fashion designer Gianni Versace owned a villa called Casa Casuarina. He was spending some time there with his partner of over a decade, Antonio D'Amico, after his latest fashion reveal in Paris, according to People magazine. Now, after spending his morning taking a walk to a nearby cafe and buying his morning newspaper, he approached the gates to his home, walking up to his front steps when 2 shots were fired from behind. The man that pulled the trigger disappeared almost immediately. Now, crime scene investigation tech Berta Valdez said the shooting was quick, quote, almost execution style. 1-2 shots and he was killed almost instantly. According to In Magazine, eyewitnesses put Cunanan at the crime scene and police found William Reese's truck in a nearby parking garage. Inside, police found Andrew's clothes and newspaper clippings about the prior murders, and Town and Country magazine said that police also found his checkbook, passport, and a pawn shop slip in the truck. For a week, police and the FBI searched Miami for Andrew Cunanan, following every tip and lead that came in. According to CBS News, police did not believe Versace's murder was a random attack. They thought that he was targeted. According to that same article, 2.5 miles from the villa and only blocks from the Normandy Hotel was a luxury houseboat that sat empty. Sometime in the evening of July 23rd, a security guard recognized Cunanan and called police. After a 5-hour standoff, SWAT moved in after throwing in a gas grenade into the houseboat and discovered a man dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in an upstairs bedroom. The following day, the body was positively identified as Andrew Cunanan, and the gun was identified to be the weapon used to kill David Madsen, William Reese, and Gianni Versace. It was also confirmed to be the gun registered to Jeff Trail. Now, Andrew never left a suicide note or anything that explained why the murders happened in the first place. There are a lot of theories. And I think the main theory was jealousy, which I get in the terms of the murders of David and Jeff. I think that he was jealous of them. You know, he was so in love with David. He was convinced that David and Jeff were seeing each other, even though they clearly weren't, because Jeff had a boyfriend, and it was not David. And I think he killed them because he wanted to be with David. And, you know, they were living successful lives. You know, Jeff was in the military. He had a job at a propane company, although they did say that the company he worked for said, you know, Jeff really didn't know anything about propane, but he was just a wonderful person to work with. And David, you know, as we said, was an incredibly successful architect and an overall really great person. In terms of Lee, I think that money had a lot to do with it. I'm sure that he had to have known who Lee was in some regard, because how did he find Lee's house, like, in a matter of, like, 24 hours? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think he targeted Lee just for, like, money, you know, and I'm sure he spent that time there after he killed Lee kind of pretending that was his house for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, he took the time to eat, to bathe, to shave. He slept in Lee's bed. You know, I'm sure part of that was because he needed to take a moment to, like, clean himself up. But I think that a lot of it had to do with playing some sort of, or acting out some sort of fantasy where that was his home. You know what I mean? Right.
Probably because he wanted to live, I'll say, the high life.
In terms of Bill was 100% killed because Andrew wanted his truck.
It was a crime of opportunity.
It was,
or at least that's my opinion. It was a crime of opportunity. He probably came across this cemetery, saw the truck, and said, "Oh, I can take that." Probably saw, looked around, probably saw Bill in his office and said, "Hand me the keys."
Yeah, and I will say that Finn's Point Cemetery is, I think, right off of I-95, which is right near, what is it, the Delaware Bridge or something like that, or it's close to the Delaware Bridge. So he was probably literally driving by and saw the Chevy and went, I need a new car. They're tracking this one. Right. In terms of Gianni Versace, I do think that he was targeted. 100% I think he was targeted. Absolutely idolized Gianni Versace. We talked about it in the last part. And I think that this was his way of becoming infamous. It was like, you have the life that I want. And if I can't have this life, you shouldn't have it either, kind of thing. Because Versace was a very successful, very rich gay man. 13 years prior to his death, he had publicly come out as a gay man with Antonio in Advocate magazine. And, there was no fallout from that. As Ryan Murphy had said, he said that, he essentially, the murder of Gianni Versace was the way to get his name out there. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be the man that everyone knew. He wanted to have this extravagant life. And with this final murder, that's exactly what happened. I don't think anyone will forget the name Andrew Cunanan, because you can't say the name Gianni Versace without thinking about his death and his murder.
Yeah, except he took the coward's way out. He absolutely took the coward's way out. Instead of, first of all, don't be a maggot. Like, I'm not getting that whole thing, but I don't understand why why somebody has to do that, why somebody has to take an innocent person's life. It doesn't make sense. It will never make sense. This, wrong place at the wrong time. Don't be like that.
Mm-hmm. And I do think, I don't know how planned the murder of Jeff was, but I think he planned some, at least some of it. I think he might have known that Jeff could end up dead before he went to Minneapolis. Just because of the way he was acting. Like, I have business to settle. Like he told the owner of that restaurant or that bar, I have business to settle in Minneapolis with a friend.
Well, that was rage.
It was. But that's what I mean. I don't think it was fully premeditated, but I think that he knew that there was a chance that Jeff would end up dead.
No, I think he went there so angry.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That there was going to be no other outcome.
Yeah. And again, unfortunately, no one's going to ever know, like, his motives behind it. Like, it's really all speculation. The only thing they do know 100% for sure is that Bill's murder was a crime of opportunity. That's the only thing that they're 100% about. But no one will ever know because he didn't leave a note. He didn't leave any sort of documentation saying why he did the things that he did. So.
Because he was a coward.
That was the very long saga of the life and crimes of Andrew Cunanan.
Another horrific rabbit hole you take us all down.
Yeah, I did a lot of research for this one. I have like 30 plus sources, which you guys, I can't fit all of them in the source notes, but you guys can always email us if you want to see all of the sources. I do mention every source, obviously, while I'm talking about it. I say where I'm getting all the information, so it's easy to look up. But if you want direct links and you don't see it in the source notes, feel free to shoot me an email. I keep all of my sources for every episode we have ever done. So if you guys want them or need them for whatever reason, you have them or you have access to them. But yeah, so we hope you guys have a wonderful week. I'm sure most of you guys have heard of this case, so I'm sorry if it was a little bit redundant. I know you told me that you've heard this
several times,
but I hope that you learned some new information.
I did, but I will go back to don't be a maggot. Like, there's no reason for it. You're not born a maggot. You don't be a maggot. There's no reason for it. None. You want to have an argument with somebody, go ahead. But once you feel like it's getting to that point where you're going to lash out in a horrific way, walk away. Cool down.
And I do think probably from early on he was showing indicators of this rage. I mean, look what he did to his mom. He threw her into a wall, dislocated her shoulder, and that was over. And again, I don't know what she said, but his reaction was disproportionate to the situation.
So everybody have a lovely rest of your week. We thank you ever so much for joining us.
Yes, as
and
always.
For tuning in.
Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of the Book of the Dead. As always, check the source notes for resources used in this chapter. And don't forget that you could follow us on Instagram at Book of the Dead Pod or shoot us an email with a case suggestion at bookofthedeadpod@gmail.com.
We just hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week. We will be back next week with another chapter of the Book of the Dead.
And always remember to stay curious, stay safe, and stay vigilant. Bye, guys.
Bye.